Good morning, good afternoon. Both in the room and online around the world, we're delighted to welcome you to this high-level panel and discussion entitled FGM Laws and Human Rights Principles Ensuring Access to Justice for All. This event is convened with the leadership of the governments of Burkina Faso and Italy, in collaboration with the Gambia, Nigeria, Canada, the state of Eritrea, Indonesia, Sweden, the World Generation, Africa-led movement, and the UNFPA UNICEF Joint Program on the Elimination of Female Genital Mutilation. On the margins of the Commission on the Status of Women at its 70th session, hard to believe it's been 70 years, one of the longest standing commissions, as the UN turns 80. My name is Leila Sarafi. I'm the chief of the Gender, Human Rights, and Inclusion branch at UNFPA, and it's my honor to serve as the moderator today. Today's event is being live streamed globally via Zoom, with interpretation available.
Sorry, can you please speak up because we can't really hear you in the back. Microphone.
How about now? Oh, yeah, that's better. All right, thank you for that. So, as I was saying, we have a live stream going on Zoom, which is excellent because we can have people joining us from anywhere, not just here in New York City. Please check the interpretation icon on the Zoom. You'll have English and French interpretation. And for those of you in the room, there's a QR code that you can scan, and it'll take you to an app that allows you to have interpretation. You'll have to use your own headphones. And we also have online sign language interpretation. Now, for those of you joining online, please let us know if at any point you cannot hear us. We want to make sure that the room is audible to you. We invite everyone to join the conversation online using the hashtags #CSW70 and #EndFGM. I just want to start by iterating a brief note of care. Discussions on these issues, including female genital mutilation and violence against women and girls, are important for protecting and caring for our survivors, but they can be emotionally challenging. And we want to make sure that participants are encouraged to engage with care, using respectful survivor-centered language and prioritizing their well-being if you need to take a break at any point during this session. This space is really about amplifying the voices of survivors, activists, and communities working to end FGM. Dr. Leila Hussein, who is in the room, please wave your hand. There she is. Dr. Hussein is here on standby if anybody would like some kind of care or a moment to just take a break. She's here to support you. Thank you so much, Dr. Hussein. We're so delighted that it's been a great interest, so many people turning up for this event, and it's not lost on us how important that is because there are so many events and so many engaging conversations happening right now, and you chose to be with us. So we know this issue means a lot to you. So thank you so much. We do have a lot of speakers, so I will keep my interventions very short and keep it moving along. And I encouraged all the panelists and speakers to please stick to their allotted time if you can, so that everyone gets an equal chance to speak and share their experience. So quickly, let me just give the three main objectives for this session. First, we'll look at the global and country level progress on this issue, as well as the remaining gaps in legal protections and human rights frameworks addressing female genital mutilation. Second, we'll highlight promising practices and innovations that improve access to justice. That is the theme of CSW this year, access to justice for survivors and girls and women at risk, whether through formal justice systems, community-based approaches, or even through new technologies. And third, we'll hear from member states, UN agencies, civil society leaders, youth advocates, and survivors, most importantly, about their commitments and actions to accelerate progress. Female genital mutilation, FGM, remains a serious violation of human rights, denying women and girls their rights to health, bodily integrity, equality, and freedom from violence. And ending FGM is part of the SDGs, but we don't have much time left. And indicator 5.3 in the SDGs tells us that we're quite far from reaching the goal, but we are all here collectively and we're pushing the agenda forward. So the question has become very urgent now, with only 4 years remaining. How do we strengthen laws, justice systems, accountability mechanisms to ensure protection, and most importantly, access to justice for every girl and every survivor? This is certainly a question we're asking ourselves every day within the UNFPA UNICEF joint program to eliminate FGM. Now, with that context, I'm going to launch into the opening remarks, and it is my honor to invite our distinguished co-host governments to deliver opening remarks. And first, please join me in welcoming His Excellency Giorgio Marapodi, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Italy to the United Nations. Your Excellency, I invite you to come to the podium for your opening remarks.
Thank you, everybody, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I share the views of Leila. It's so beautiful to see the room so crowded. So thank you to all of you. And I would like to express my sincere gratitude to all governments that have co-organized this meeting, the governments of Burkina Faso, Canada, Eritrea, and Sweden, as well as the UNFPA, and that is hosting us, and the UNFPA UNICEF joint program on the elimination of female genital mutilation, and the Girl Generation Africa led the movement to end FGM. Your leadership in convening this landmark discussion is invaluable, and we are grateful for your steadfast commitment to advancing this critical issue. FGM remains a serious and pressing global concern, and preventing and combating all forms of violence against women and girls is a core priority of the Italian government. In this context, Italy reaffirms its clear and unwavering determination to end female genital mutilation everywhere it persists, because we think that is not only a harmful practice, but it is a fundamental breach of human rights. It curtails freedom, constrains potential, and stands in direct opposition to the progress we seek toward true and lasting gender equality. The scale of the problem remains alarming. Population growth in affected countries has increased the overall number of cases. Luckily, there are also signs of progress. Over the past 3 decades, the proportion of adolescent girls subjected to FGM has declined. This shows that sustained effort, national, regional, and at the international level, can make a real difference. Yet, if we are to accelerate progress, we must redouble the efforts. Raising awareness remains essential, and it must be pursued through a comprehensive multidisciplinary approach, one that makes clear the deep connection between harmful practices, gender inequality, and violence against women. Italy has long been at the forefront on the global effort to end female genital mutilation, and since 2008, the Italian Development Cooperation has contributed significantly to the global eradication efforts by funding the UNFPA UNICEF joint program on the elimination of FGM, widely recognized as the leading global initiative in this field. From the launch of the program to date, Italy has invested nearly 43 million euros in this shared endeavor for the well-being and empowerment of women and girls worldwide. At the national level, thanks to a long-standing tradition of public engagement and strong legislation, the incidence of female genital mutilation in Italy remains comparatively low. However, we are fully conscious that no country can consider itself immune. The presence of communities originating from countries where FGM is still practiced calls for effective prevention measures. Through the Italian law number 7, 2006, Italy introduced specific criminal provisions to punish anyone who performs or facilitates female genital mutilation, clearly affirming that such violence is unacceptable under any circumstances. We are equally convinced that civil society organizations play a vital role in ensuring that our actions are effective and sustainable. Therefore, we have launched a partnership with a leading Italian university to carry out a comprehensive assessment of the phenomenon in our country. The findings will serve as the basis for an integrated communication plan designed with tailored messages, tools, and approaches to reach different target groups through the most appropriate channels. Today's event gives us the opportunity to reflect together on the political and social measures that are still needed to bring this practice to an end once and for all. Allow me to conclude with a clear message. Italy will not waver, we will not look away, and we will not relent until every girl everywhere is free from the threat of FGM. I wish you a productive and inspiring side event, and once again, I thank you all. Thank you.
You so much, Your Excellency, for those important reflections and your unwavering commitment, which we've felt that commitment for many years when we've been addressing this issue. So thank you so much for your leadership in advancing this issue, which also means you're advancing gender equality and human rights. Thank you so much. It's now my great pleasure to invite Her Excellency Madam Aminata Ouattara Cissé, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Burkina Faso to the United Nations. Your Excellency.
Merci, Mesdames et Messieurs les ministres, distingués amis et partenaires, Mesdames et Messieurs, je joins ma voix à celle de l'Italie pour vous souhaiter la bienvenue à ce Side Event très important pour nous. Je voudrais vous transmettre au nom de ma délégation nos chaleureuses salutations à l'occasion de l'examen de l'importante problématique des mutilations génitales féminines. J'adresse mes remerciements à nos traditionnels et fidèles amis et partenaires bilatéraux et multilatéraux engagés avec nous depuis plusieurs décennies dans cette question sensible et délicate. Je salue spécialement le Fonds des Nations Unies pour la population, pour sa disponibilité et son engagement continu dans le combat contre cette pratique néfaste et préjudiciable au plein épanouissement des fillettes et des femmes. Mesdames et Messieurs, la thématique qui nous rassemble, à savoir garantir et renforcer l'accès à la justice pour toutes les femmes et filles, aligner les lois sur les MGF, sur les principes des droits humains, est très évocateur de la nécessité de créer et d'adapter les cadres juridiques et réglementaires, de sorte à les rendre propices à la mise en œuvre efficace et satisfaisante des actions de lutte contre les MGF. Le Burkina Faso, après avoir ratifié la majeure partie des instruments juridiques internationaux, a pris des mesures législatives, juridiques et administratives très fortes et dissuasives contre la pratique de l'excision. Un exemple, la révision du Code pénal en 2018 a permis d'ériger les mutilations génitales féminines au rang d'infraction. Cette disposition coercitive a contribué à durcir les peines et à réprimer sévèrement les auteurs et les complices d'infractions dans le domaine des MGF, réduisant drastiquement le niveau de la pratique sur l'ensemble du territoire burkinabé. De même, avec le concours de ses partenaires, le Burkina Faso a mis en œuvre la 4e phase 2022-2026 du programme conjoint UNFPA-UNICEF pour l'accélération de l'abandon de l'excision dans 12 régions. Ce programme, dont les cibles sont les leaders religieux, communautaires et coutumiers, les traduits praticiens et les exciseuses, a permis effectivement à tous ces acteurs à tous ces acteurs clés d'être impliqués dans la lutte contre les MGF. En outre, mon pays, le Burkina Faso, s'est engagé à améliorer considérablement l'accès à la justice pour les victimes de l'excision à travers l'organisation d'audiences foraines et la création d'un numéro vert pour les appels gratuits anonymes afin de dénoncer les faits ou des tentatives d'excision. En plus, les brigades de commissariat et de police organisent périodiquement des patrouilles dissuasives et de sensibilisation. En somme, toutes ces initiatives ont permis d'atteindre des résultats probants. Plus de 90% des villages et secteurs du Burkina Faso ont pris des engagements publics d'abandon de l'excision. Le Burkina Faso s'est également engagé dans la restauration de la dignité des victimes de MGF à travers la réparation des séquelles de l'excision et la reconstitution des organes mutilés. Mesdames et messieurs, au-delà des résultats réalisés dans la lutte contre les MGF, la question de dignité et de valeur des femmes constitue une priorité pour les autorités du Burkina Faso. C'est pourquoi le Burkina Faso, en sa qualité de modèle de résilience juridique et judiciaire dans la lutte contre les MGF, continue d'attirer l'attention sur la nécessité de renforcer les dispositifs nationaux pour maintenir une veille efficace du combat engagé depuis des décennies contre ce fléau. C'est dans ce sens également que nous menons le plaidoyer pour un renforcement de la coopération juridique et judiciaire transfrontalière afin d'éradiquer définitivement toutes les sources de résistance à l'élimination des mutilations génitales féminines. Le Burkina Faso renouvelle sa disponibilité et son engagement dans la lutte contre la pratique des MGF et réitère son attachement profond à la pleine réalisation de l'objectif zéro mutilation génitale féminine d'ici l'horizon 2030. Le pays des hommes intègres continuera à maintenir haut le flambeau de la lutte pour un épanouissement véritable et une jouissance des droits de toutes les femmes et les jeunes filles. Le Burkina Faso lance l'appel à tous. La lutte contre les MGF n'est jamais définitivement acquise. Les hommes et femmes travaillent continuellement sur le terrain pour sauvegarder les acquis et interpellent les partenaires à continuer leur investissement pour qu'effectivement, à l'horizon 2030, on puisse dire aucune fille et aucune femme n'est nouvellement victime de MGF. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup, Your Excellency, for sharing with us all the wonderful and important work you're doing in Burkina Faso, but I must say at the global stage as well. You've always been there supporting this issue and bringing it to the attention of global leaders here in New York and throughout the international fora. So those are our opening remarks, and now we move to our keynote speakers. And it's really my honor to invite global leaders who, within their respective institutions, have really been working to move and push and shape this issue worldwide. So please join me now in welcoming P.O. Smith, UNFPA's Deputy Executive Director of Program ad interim, who will share with us some keynote remarks. P.O., the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Leila. Sometimes I don't know what the difference is between the opening and the keynote, but I hope I will live up to the moment. Firstly, welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to our home here at UNFPA. On behalf of our executive director, thank you so much for showing out in such great numbers. And thank you also for being here for CSW. The backdrop, of course, is a world that is in fracture. We're here to discuss justice. But of course, we know that that justice for women and girls is becoming a very distant, reality because of the pushback on women's rights and girls' rights right now. And we all have to be attuned to that. And of course, we know that the most egregious form of that violence manifests itself in the issue that we're here to discuss on FGM. But we need all of you with us in this fight, in this effort, and we need your solidarity. So thank you for being here. I want to welcome our partners, in particular from government. Thank you to our two ambassadors for your opening remarks, ambassadors from Italy and Burkina Faso. I also wish to acknowledge the governments of Canada, Eritrea, the Gambia, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Sweden. I also want to recognize our friends who are here from the Girl Generation, Africa-led movement, and above all, the survivors, the youth leaders, our activists and our experts, who remain the driving force of the global movement to end FGM. And finally, of course, a warm welcome to our good friends at UNICEF, and with whom we're very proud to partner on this work. So the question today is for us to think about how we ensure and accelerate access to justice for every single girl and woman at risk or affected by FGM. And justice can be quite an abstract thing. And we have to remember behind every statistic, there is that girl. Whoever she is and wherever she is, she has to be front and center of our minds, driving the solutions that it is that we want to see. I think there are three essential points I would put on the table. First, our Secretary General stated last month that FGM violates the universal human rights to life, health, and bodily integrity. And it is rooted in the very same gender bias that restricts girls' access to education, it narrows women's opportunities for employment, and it limits their participation in public life. It's a very deliberate attack on the fundamental rights. Second, the scale of this challenge is so significant still in the year 2026. More than 230 million girls and women across the globe, north and south, are living with the consequences of FGM. And an estimated 4 million girls remain at risk each year. And third, ending FGM is not optional. It's an integral part of achieving the SDGs, like we heard from Leila, but also to fulfilling our collective commitment to equality, to dignity, to justice for every woman and girls. The priority theme of the CSW this year gives us a very important lens through which to examine progress on justice and legal reforms in our efforts to eliminate FGM. So we have to take progress when we get it. So we're seeing a growing momentum of the approximately 1,200 universal periodic review recommendations that relate to FGM. 969, so around 80%, have been accepted by member states. And in addition to that, 59 of the 94 countries where FGM is practiced have now enacted legal bans. These legal frameworks are a critical foundation, but we all know that laws must be matched by implementation. They must translate into policies, services, and accountability mechanisms that ensure access to justice and protection for women and girls, particularly those women and girls facing discrimination due to poverty, ethnicity, geography, or disability. Over the past year, several important advances have taken place. In Somalia, the states of Hirshabelle, Jubaland, and Southwest adopted comprehensive anti-FGM laws, while the federal government also approved a national FGM policy, an important step toward nationwide protection. Across the region, the East African Legislative Assembly introduced a prohibition of FGM bill aimed at harmonizing legal frameworks and addressing cross-border risks. In Indonesia, where the practice has often been medicalized, new health regulations now require health workers to refuse requests to perform FGM. These developments reflect growing political commitment, but progress is also driven by the courage of the survivors who speak out, the leadership of youth activists, and the sustained advocacy of community movements. A landmark development occurred in July of last year, when the ECOWAS Community Court of Justice ruled against the government of Sierra Leone, mandating the adoption of legislation banning FGM, providing compensation to survivor Khadijatu Balema Aliyu, and strengthening protections for the rights of women and girls. Yet securing laws is only one step. Our ultimate goal is universal access to justice, where every girl and woman at risk or affected can seek protection, report violations, and access survivor-centered support. We are seeing promising approaches. In Burkina Faso, mobile courts are expanding access to justice in rural areas. Legal aid funds are supporting victims, and new technologies are strengthening evidence gathering while bridging community mechanisms with formal justice systems. So, dear friends, today's dialogue offers yet another opportunity for us to share lessons and reaffirm our commitment to concrete action that advances justice for every woman and girl. Rest assured that UNFPA stands firmly with you. Together with UNICEF, through the joint program on the elimination of FGM, we will continue to partner and support with member states to strengthen legal frameworks, to reinforce enforcement, and to ensure survivor-centered justice. I hope we will leave this room with a clear resolve. I know that the next generation is watching us, waiting to see how, when we put our words into action. They deserve a world where safety, dignity, and justice are not privileges, but guaranteed rights. I think the time for them to waiting is over. And so I'm really hoping that we're going to see the kind of progress we need on justice, and that these conversations will have to become fewer and fewer, because we're actually addressing through national efforts, through partnerships like we see in this room today, and we hope for that future that every girl deserves is just around the corner. So thank you again for being with us this afternoon, and I wish you all a very fruitful conversation.
Thank you so much, Pio, Deputy Executive Director, for pointing out very concrete examples and the survivor-centered framework, and reminding us about how critical that is to the work we do. Thank you so much, Pio. We now have the pleasure of hearing from Shima Sen-Gupta, Director of Child Protection and Migration at UNICEF, and our wonderful partner as part of the joint program on FGM. Shima, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Leila. Thank you all. And again, I must say, I'm impressed as well by just the number of people we have in this room, and the number of people who are so committed to what we're here to talk about today, really to talk about ensuring access to justice for all women and girls. And that's so important. And as you were speaking, Pio, I was reflecting that, you know, this whole week, and I'm sure it's the same for all of you when we've been to different meetings, we are talking about this, about access to justice, whether it is linked to FGM or child marriage and all these other issues that girls and women continue to face. And it makes one wonder, right? We've come a long way. We definitely have. But it's this piece, the justice piece, that, as you said, it's very difficult, because what does it really mean? And I think that's where we are today. We really need, in these couple of weeks, to unpack that and to commit to making those changes. So, Excellencies here, the governments who've always been partners and friends, our colleagues, the champions for girls, the survivors, every one of you in this room who has constantly been committed to this. A big welcome, and very happy to see you. We know, and this has been, for on the agenda for such a long time, FGM absolutely is a human rights violation. The Secretary General has spoken to that recently, as Pio reminded us. We have constantly been talking about it, but we really need urgent and sustained action. That is what we need, because otherwise we are not going to reach the goals of SDG 5.3 on FGM elimination. And we really, really have to, hunker down and deliver on this one. And as we speak, we know there's an estimated 3 million girls who undergo FGM each year in Africa alone. And Africa has the highest share of documented FGM cases worldwide. And then we have the others as well. And given the population growth in countries where the practice is deeply entrenched, it is unlikely to see these numbers go down if we do nothing. This number could also double. So all the more reason why we need to hunker down and deliver. If we, as a minimum, continue the progress sustained over the last decade, we may just be able to keep the number flat. And just reflect on that. That is quite something. So while we talk about elimination, it's also the number of women and girls who are living, who are survivors. And so it's so important that we redouble our efforts. So given the focus is on justice for women and girls, what I would like to do today is speak of a subject that really merits further attention. So what we continue to see, and we see this at the community level, at the national level, is really a gap between the legal prohibitions on paper and the actual practices on the ground. And Pio just spoke to it, the number of countries that actually do have legislation. But there is that gap between that legislation and the practice. And I see so many heads nodding. So we are all well aware of that. And that gap has now even led to broader pushbacks on the prohibition of FGM in countries. So on the one side, we have countries who are coming in to legislate more against this. And then on the other hand, we have countries who had legislated and are now pushing back. So this is quite a tenuous situation for all of us who work in this realm to deal with. Of the 31 countries where we have SDG data on FGM, 25 of those countries, as you have heard, have enacted legislation. But recently, we also witnessed countries incorporate anti-FGM provisions into their constitutions, which is great news, advancing protection of the rights of women and girls. And so to ensure that comprehensive protection of women and girls, it's important also, and this is the minute detail, it's important that legislation covers all forms of FGM for all ages. And we know these practices vary in different parts of the world, in different countries, and we really need to ensure this is comprehensive. limited legal coverage can really undermine effective prevention and accountability. We also know the absence of legislative enforcement is often linked to limited awareness, weak enforcement capacity, and the fact that FGM is driven by very strong social norms and expectations that do not necessarily change based on legislative prohibitions. And that is why the work that we do with communities, the work that each one of you actually does out there is so, so important. And we've also seen in some cases that actually strict enforcement does quite the opposite. It is reported to drive the practice underground or provoke community resistance. And in communities where FGM remains strongly supported, legal norms may conflict with social norms. And we are so well aware of this. And that then leads to further non-compliance or covert continuation of the practice. And yesterday we had a very interesting conversation with members of the European Socioeconomic Council, and a bit reflecting the permanent representative of Italy's words earlier. As communities move to other countries, as they settle in other countries, we all of us very proudly bring in our own culture, our language, our practices. But there's also some of them which are harmful and which are sometimes completely opposite to the laws of the land that they are in. And again, I recall when I was working in Somalia many years ago, where we would see in the summer holidays, you know, families, Somali families who were settled in Western countries would come for holidays. And then we would start getting calls from these Somali European girls who were aware of their rights and suddenly realized that the parents had brought them in for something else. So this is why it's so important that we bring the two together. We need to ensure that these legal measures are supported by community engagement efforts. And that would ensure that we avoid backlash, we ensure that the laws are effective. And when social norms are already shifting, legislation can actually provide an enabling environment for the abandonment of the harmful practice. Globally, we've seen that the justice framework for children is evolving to be more context relevant by reflecting the plurality of legal systems. And this is the reality. Informal justice systems have begun to feature in international policy dialogues about access to justice. It's not about ignoring them. It's about bringing the two together. And that is so important. And so with this, I would like to highlight two initiatives. One is the upcoming General Comment number 27 of the CRC Committee. It encourages stakeholders to consider the multiple types of mechanisms that can provide a remedy for child rights violations, as well as how these mechanisms interact and complement each other, including informal or non-state systems, community-based, customary, and religious justice mechanisms, as well as alternative and restorative dispute resolution mechanisms. So it's going to be really important to use that to ensure that that is practiced. Second, at the African regional level, there is precedent for integrating customary justice into child protection frameworks. And this is really very good practice. So the ACERWC's 2011 guidelines on action for children in justice system in Africa urged states to ensure that the CRC's fundamental principles apply in all justice proceedings, whether formal or informal. Efforts to end FGM have shown that legal measures are more effective when they're combined with this strong community engagement. And in several countries, we are seeing national strategies increasingly involving traditional and religious leaders, women's groups, and even former practitioners in outreach and mediation efforts. This helps translate those legal norms into credible messages
and strengthen the trust in justice processes. And this shows the need for collaboration between formal and informal. I cannot stress on this more. Because this collaboration then actually is based on the mutual understanding. So today, during our discussions, we will be examining justice for girls and women from different perspectives. And I urge all of us to consider how we can do this in a way that protects the girls and women from the pushback on the right. We must apply a holistic socio-legal approach to address FGM and avoid a clash between international, regional, and national legal standards. The UNFPA UNICEF Joint Program on FGM works across the socio-ecological model, from individual and community levels to services and policy, acknowledging that ending FGM involves not only passing laws, but also changing social conventions and expectations. And as I finish, I would like to emphasize 3 key recommendations. First, that we promote collaboration between the formal and customary justice systems to address harmful practices, including FGM, through structured and rights-based engagement. Second, that we ensure safeguards and accountability mechanisms so that community-based justice reinforces rather than weakens child protection standards and girls' rights. And finally, ensure that FGM is systematically integrated into those international and national justice reform agenda that recognize and formalize customary and informal justice systems. This includes using global frameworks such as the forthcoming CRC General Comment number 27 as policy levers to align child rights obligations, particularly regarding FGM, with national reforms. And I too hope that we leave this room resolved to make this happen. Thank you.
The complexity of access to justice, but all the different ways in which we can leverage it. Thank you so much, Shima. Yes, now we will go to a short video entitled "What Works" before we get into hearing some more from our member states about what they're doing in their national context. So while the video plays, I'll just remind the next set of speakers that I'll call you up and introduce you to the lectern as well. So here we go.
Coordinated efforts by governments. Female genital mutilation affects over 230 million girls and women worldwide, with around 4 million subjected to this harmful practice every year. Coordinated efforts by government, national and international organizations, civil society groups and donors have driven significant change toward ending this harmful practice. Research and evaluations from the past decades offer insight into effective strategies to address FGM. Studies show that community mobilization efforts involving influential members like community and religious leaders and health workers can help shift societal attitudes toward FGM. Community dialogues that focus on health and the physical, psychological, and emotional consequences of FGM are vital in bringing about change. Involving the health sector is equally critical. Training healthcare workers can give the necessary support to become advocates for FGM prevention and provide adequate care for survivors. Effective media and social marketing can raise awareness about the dangers of FGM, encouraging discussions and promoting social change. Formal education plays a key role. Evidence shows that girls whose mothers have at least a primary education are 40% less likely to undergo this harmful practice. However, the rise of counter movements against FGM elimination efforts threatens the gains achieved. Building synergies and enabling strong movements to end FGM is necessary. We must take urgent action by investing in and scaling effective solutions and systems supported by enabling laws and policies. These solutions must complement one another to be most effective. Let us build a future where every girl can live free from FGM, in an environment where she can exercise her voice, choice, and agency. Together, let's unite to end FGM.
So we'll now turn to a discussion with member states, focusing on how the governments are accelerating access to justice at the national level. We're going to go straight now to Honorable Mr. Pungat Bajuri Ali, Deputy Minister for Human and Cultural Development, the Ministry of National Development Planning in Indonesia. We are waiting for a couple of our speakers, so we'll just continue with our program. And Honorable Mr. Ali, I welcome you to the lectern for your intervention.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues. Indonesia remains firmly committed to the accelerations of eliminations of female genital mutilations. We recognize that this practice undermines the health, dignity, and fundamental right of women and girls, and therefore requires a coordinated and sustained response. Our efforts begin with strengthening the evidence base. Since 2021, the national data on FGM has been collected through the National Women's Life Experience Survey on Violence Against Women. As the only country in the South and Southeast Asia Pacific regions with comprehensive national data set on the prevalence and the pattern of FGM, the findings show encouraging signs of decline, although approximately 46.3% of women aged 15 to 49 in Indonesia have experienced FGM. The survey also confirms that the practice remains closely linked to the deeply rooted social norms and perceptions of religious and cultural identity, helping inform more targeted interventions. Building on this evidence, Indonesia has elevated the eliminations of FGM as a national development priority. This issue is integrated into the 2025-2029 National Medium-Term Development Plan as mandated by Presidential Regulations number 12/2025, ensuring that the prevention efforts are addressed not only through health policies, but also through education and community empowerments. Our legal and regulatory frameworks has also been significantly strengthened. Government Regulations number 28 of 2024 on health explicitly prohibits FGM, further enforced by the Ministry of Health Regulations number 2, 2025, which mandates its eliminations and coordinated actions across sectors. Indonesia is also advancing a multi-sectoral response through the development of national strategy for eliminations of violence against women and children, in which the prevention of FGM is addressed as a key component. Recognizing that the harmful social norms remains a central challenge, we continue to engage communities and strengthen partnerships with major faith-based organizations, including Nahdlatul Ulama and Muhammadiyah. Progressive voices within these institutions, including through the Indonesia Ulama Congress, have issued religious guidance declaring harmful forms of FGM as haram or forbidden. This leadership plays a critical role in promoting interpretations of religious teachings that uphold the dignity, health, and the right of women and girls. Indonesia is also reinforcing the accountability of health system. Health workers are prohibited from performing FGM, and professional associations such as Indonesia Midwives Associations have issued directives forbidding their members for carrying out the practice, helping to prevent its medicalizations. Eliminating FGM have also been accompanied by strengthened access to justice and protections for women and girls. This includes improving legal awareness and ensuring that the survivors have access to appropriate health and psychosocial support services, as outlined in our 2030 roadmap for preventions of FGM and embedded in our national strategy on the eliminations of violence against women and children. Excellencies, ending FGMs requires also strategic partnerships between governments, civil society, religious institutions, and community themselves. Transforming social norms, strengthening institutions, and empowering women and girls must go hand in hand. Indonesia remains committed to working with global partners to accelerate progress so that every woman and girl can live free from harmful practices and fully realize her potential. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deputy Minister, for sharing your reflections from Indonesia and talking about, I like how you ended on the importance of partnerships. That's critical. We will now move to Her Excellency, Ms. Sophia Tesfamariam, Permanent Representative Eritrea to the United Nations. Madam Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us today, and we welcome you to the podium. By the way, we've asked them to turn up the air conditioning so that we could get it a little cooler in here. I know it's a bit warm. Yes, that's important.
Thank you very much. It is a full room, kind of making us nervous standing here. Madam Chair, I want to thank the organizers. Very important event. For Eritrea, this is the third event that we're addressing FGM. So you know how important it is to us. And we welcome the convening of this important discussion and express our gratitude to all the organizers and the fellow presenters this afternoon. FGM remains one of the most persistent harmful practices affecting women and girls globally, as you said and heard from our previous speakers. And Eritrea shares the international community's commitment to the complete elimination of this harmful practice. Our experience demonstrates that progress requires a holistic approach that combines strong legal frameworks, sustained public education, and community ownership of change. In Eritrea, efforts to address harmful traditional practices began well before independence. Eritrea is a young country and we became independent in 1991. We're just almost 35 years old. During the liberation struggle, awareness campaigns in liberated areas challenged practices harmful to women and girls and promoted gender equality as an essential component of Eritrea's broader social transformation. Following independence, Eritrea translated these principles into national policy and law. A key milestone was the adoption of Proclamation number 158 in 2007, which criminalizes FGM and all its forms and imposes penalties on those who perform, facilitate, or promote it. This legislation affirms clearly that the protection of women and girls and their access to justice is a national priority. At the same time, Eritrea has long recognized that legal prohibition alone cannot transform deeply rooted social norms. Sustainable change must be anchored within the communities themselves. For this reason, Eritrea adopted a community-centered and multi-sectoral strategy that combines legal enforcement with social mobilization and grassroots engagement. A central pillar of this effort has been the National Union of Eritrean Women, a grassroots organization with more than 300,000 members and a presence in approximately 90% of Eritrean villages. And in the diaspora, which I brought the New York chapter of NUA is here today so they can be part of this event also and take some of the information that we're providing here. Through community dialogues, public education, and grassroots mobilization, the union has empowered women, families, and youth to challenge harmful practices and protect girls. Religious leaders and community elders have also played a crucial role. More than 100 religious leaders across faith traditions have publicly affirmed that FGM has no religious basis, helping dismantle misconceptions that historically sustain the practice. To ensure sustainable change, Eritrea has also established community-based committees across all regions, working closely with health and social welfare professionals. These committees provide psychosocial counseling, sexual and reproductive health services, and support for survivors while promoting positive behavioral change within communities. The FGM awareness has been integrated into school curricula, empowering younger generations with accurate knowledge and fostering gender-sensitive values that help ensure the rejection of harmful practices across future generations. These sustained efforts have produced clear and measurable results. The findings demonstrate a remarkable decline. FGM prevalence among girls under 15 dropped from 18.2% in 2014 to 2.3% in 2020, while among girls under 5, the rate fell from 6.9% to just 0.54% during the same period. Compared with the 2010 Eritrean Population and Health Survey, which reported 33.2% prevalences among girls under 15 and 12.4% among girls under 5, this represents an extraordinary reduction within just a decade. Equally important, social attitudes are shifting. Increasing numbers of communities are publicly declaring the abandonment of FGM, with both women and men are becoming active advocates for this eradication. These results place Eritrea among the countries demonstrating the determined national leadership combined with community-driven mobilization can produce meaningful progress in eliminating harmful practices and strengthening access to justice for women and girls. Ladies and gentlemen, while these gains are encouraging, Eritrea remains committed to sustaining and accelerating this momentum. The next phase of our national effort focuses on expanding FGM-free zones, strengthening community monitoring mechanisms, amplifying the voices of survivors and youth advocates, and linking anti-FGM initiatives with broader programs promoting women's education and economic empowerment. Eritrea's experience demonstrates that lasting change emerges when legal frameworks, education, and grassroots mobilization reinforce one another. Let us therefore continue working together to ensure that every woman and girl can live free from harmful practices and enjoy full access to justice and opportunity. I thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Excellency. What progress you've made in Eritrea, and you really give us hope. Those numbers are really something. In less than a decade, we applaud you. And as you say, when national determination is combined with grassroots and community mobilization, you can really see the change. Thank you for that encouraging outlook. We move now to Sophia Orebrink. Sophia is the lead policy specialist for gender equality in Sweden. And we're very delighted to welcome you today, Sophia. Please join us to the lectern for your intervention.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the organizers for inviting me to speak for this at this important event. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues and partners, FGM remains a profound violation of human rights for millions of women and girls. It is not only a health or cultural issue, it's a justice and human rights issue for all women and girls. It violates the rights to health, bodily integrity, and freedom from violence and discrimination. Global commitments are strong through CEDAW, the Convention of the Rights of the Child, and the 2030 Agenda, particularly Target 5.3 on eliminating harmful practices. Yet, major gaps remain in translating these commitments into real access to justice. Let me begin with the importance of strong legal framework and effective implementation. Many countries have criminalized FGM, but we know that legislation alone is not enough. In many contexts, enforcement remains weak due to limited institutional capacity, the absence of reporting mechanism, and persistence of social stigma. And at times, there is a misalignment between national commitment and the authority of religious and traditional leaders at community level. Structured dialogue between stakeholders is essential to bridge these gaps and support locally credible efforts to end FGM. Through SIDA, Sweden supports partner countries in strengthening justice systems and survivor centers pathways. And through the UNFPA and UNICEF joint program that we're so proudly supporter of, over 16,000 communities have announced that they abandon FGM, supported by community surveillance system that have helped protect more than 945,000 girls since 2017. A second important area is transforming harmful discriminatory gender norms through community engagement. Women's rights organizations, youth networks, and survivor advocates are at the heart of sustainable change. Engaging men and boys is equally crucial. In 2024 alone, nearly 850,000 boys and men in this program join initiatives promoting positive masculinities. This clearly shows that when a whole community are engaged, expectations around girls' rights can and do change. A third area of concerns access to services, protection, and survivor-centered support. Survivors must be able to safely access medical care, psychosocial support, child protection, and legal assistance. Healthcare workers must also be equipped to prevent and recognize medicalization of FGM, a deeper troubled trend. Swedish Development Cooperation prioritized SRHR to ensure that FGM responses are embedded within broader systems that can uphold women and girls' dignity and human rights. And finally, education and innovation are key to long-term sustainable change. Education and girls' empowerment remain some of the strongest safeguards against harmful practices. Digital tools can strengthen evidence collection and connect survivors with services. But digital platforms are also increasingly misused to spread misinformation and encourage harmful practices. This calls for a safe, ethical, and survivor-centered digital strategies. Across regions, we are also witnessing a worrying global pushback against gender equality and SRHR, often driven by well-funded and organized actors. This threatens hard-won progress and underscores the need for sustained political commitment. We need to push forward against the pushback. FGM is not merely a tradition. It is harmful discriminatory gender norm, a form of gender-based violence intended to control women's bodies and sexuality. It is one of the most brutal yet entirely preventable violations of girls' rights. Sweden remains therefore committed to working with government, civil society, communities, and all of you here today to end FGM once and for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sophia. That concludes our round of government interventions. We do hope that if the minister from the Gambia and Nigeria can still make it, we welcome them to join us and give their interventions. We will move now to a video, and then after which I'll immediately call up our panelists for the final panel of the day. So here we are going to play the FGM law case of the Gambia.
As I said, honorable members, each of every member has a copy of the Women's Amendment Bill 2024. And we are looking through it clause by clause. So, honorable members, those in favor of the clause to stand part of the bill, please raise your cards. Those against, please raise your cards. The Women Amendment Bill 2024, having gone through the consideration stage with all the clauses voted down, is hereby deemed rejected and negative. This ruling is appropriate as the Assembly cannot be engaged in such a futile exercise as to allow the bill to proceed to third reading without its clauses.
I understand we now have another video that we're playing now, correct? Yeah. We thought we'd break up the statements, give you something to look at that's different. Who shall speak first? So why don't I introduce our final panel to join us? We're going to do things slightly differently. We're going to have you come up and sit on the chairs here. In the interest of time, we're running a little bit behind. And first we'll introduce Fazia and then she'll talk about the video. Okay, let's go. In the meantime, if you can just start getting ready, our third panel.
It was on a Sunday night when my mom called me and she said, "My daughter, come," in a low voice. I went quietly. Suddenly, my mom said, "My daughter, tomorrow is your D-Day." I was shocked to hear that, but I was not expected to say anything. In the morning, I was dragged and pinned on the ground when 3 women sat and crucified me on the floor. I cried till I had no voice. The only thing I said was, "Mom, where are you?" And the only answer I got was, "Quiet, quiet girl." The pain I had experienced was one I will never forget for the rest of my life, and I will not wish the same to happen to my friend. That night, I had sleepless nights. I could see an old lady with many bleeds doing it again and again and again. I screamed, and my mom came running to check on me. My loving parent, is this what I really deserve? I'm asking all of you, is this really what I deserve? Thank you.
Story. Well, I will invite now our panelists. Please join us here on the stage, and you'll see a familiar face actually that you've just seen on the screen. So I'm inviting Rio, Manuel, Fatu, Divya, and Oluwasian. Please join us. So this next panel is really about hearing from survivors, youth leaders, civil society advocates, human rights and legal experts, as well as UN agencies and international financial institutions. We've really brought all the stakeholders together in this final panel. And you all are working in your own respective ways at the forefront of expanding access to justice. Good, we have enough chairs. So I'm going to first start with Fauzia Adan, who you just saw on the screen. Thank you for your sharing your story and something that is so personal. You are an FGM survivor and youth leader and attorney, and you are based in Kenya. And we'd really invite you now to tell us a little bit about some of the work you're doing and your reflections. And I'll come to give you this mic. Okay, so you're in New York, Kenya. Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. What you just watched is a glimpse into a moment that changed my life forever. When I was 8 years old in Kenya, my body was cut in the name of tradition. At that moment, there was no courtroom, no lawyer, no system that could protect me. There was no justice. That experience is why the question we're discussing today is not abstract to me. It's deeply personal. Today, as an attorney, a survivor, and through my work at Global Child Hope, I remain closely connected to the communities where I grew up. And from that experience, I have learned three things that are essential if we are serious about accelerating access to justice. First, I learned that laws alone are not enough. When I was a child, there was no law that protected me. Today, Kenya has laws that prohibit female genital mutilation. That is important progress. But a law written in a capital city does not automatically protect a girl in a remote village. Many families simply do not know that their daughters have rights. As an attorney, that has taught me something important. A law that exists only on paper does not create justice. It creates the illusion of justice. Justice becomes real only when the law reaches the lives of girls it was meant to protect through trained judges, accountable law enforcement, and civil society organizations that help communities monitor these protections. Second, I learned that change begins when survivors are given the space to speak. After what happened to me, I confronted my mother and the women in my family and asked them why this practice exists and why it is necessary. Those conversations were difficult, but they changed something. My mother promised that my younger sister would not go through what I went through. She kept that promise. My sisters were not cut, my cousins were not cut, and that experience taught me something powerful. When survivors speak, silence begins to lose its power. Third, I learned that lasting justice happens when communities themselves begin to change. Through education and open conversations, families begin to understand that protecting the girl is not a rejection of culture. It is a protection of dignity. Parents begin to make different decisions, and girls begin to grow up knowing that their bodies belong to them. Because ultimately, justice is not measured only by the strength of our laws. It is measured by whether the most vulnerable girls are actually protected. And if you remember the poem that you just heard in the documentary, there was a question I asked as a child. My loving parent, is this what I really deserve? And then I asked something else. I'm asking all of you, is this what I deserve? Today, that question is still being asked by millions of girls around the world. The true measure of justice is whether we're finally ready to answer them. And the real question for all of us is whether the world will finally be ready to answer her. Because somewhere tonight, a little girl will ask the same question that I once asked. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You said justice only becomes real when it touches the lives of those it was meant to protect. Thank you so much for sharing your story and your activism. We now move to Rio Hada, who is the Chief of Equality Development and Rule of Law Section at OHCHR. Rio, it's great to see you. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Laila, and I'm very humbled after coming after such a powerful statement. And I think that opening video and her testimony, the Fosia's testimony, really echoes the points that Pio made at the very beginning. Behind that number of 230 million, there are real children, young, very young children, and their fear, pain, and lifelong harm. So FGM is an extreme form of gender-based violence, and let me be very clear, neither culture or tradition, no religion can justify it. Human rights draw a line between culture and tradition and violence and harm, and FGM crosses that line. But despite years of advocacy, progress remains far too slow. UN estimates tells us that we must move 27 times faster to eliminate FGM if we are to meet that SDG target. That reality demands that we scale up what works and confront the emerging risks that threaten to reverse that gain. In 2024, our office, Human Rights, wrote a report raising the alarm about cross-border and transnational FGM. We saw vacation cutting, like it was mentioned just before, new transnational hubs and families moving girls across the borders during school holidays to evade the law. These patterns make one thing clear. Isolated national responses are no longer enough. Coordinated international action is essential. The human rights framework gives states a roadmap to prevent, investigate, and redress FGM. This means adopting and enforcing coherent laws, addressing the root causes of discrimination, and dismantling the stereotypes that continue to police women and girls' bodies. But as it was said, the law cannot alone end FGM. Change happens when communities lead. Grassroots movements, women's human rights defenders, traditional and religious leaders, and survivors themselves are the ones breaking the silence and shifting deeply rooted norms. Their leadership is indispensable, and it must be resourced and protected. OSHR has recommended clear actions, strengthen legal framework on FGM, invest public awareness and education, improve data collection, including on cross-border cases, build survivor-centered services for long-term support, and establish monitoring and evaluation systems to guide programming and budgets. These steps require political will, adequate funding, and strong partnerships, especially in humanitarian settings where risks are particularly intensified and services are scarce. To conclude, where there is a taboo, there are no rights. Breaking that taboo, listening to survivors, strengthening justice systems, and working across borders will bring us closer to the world where every girl can live free from violence and in full control of their bodies. Thank you.
OHCHR for always beating the drum on the importance of this human rights issue. And you talked about isolated national responses not being enough and how we need to work across borders and across national boundaries. We now move to Manuel Contreras Urbina, global lead at the World Bank on gender-based violence. Manuel, thank you so much for being with us today and tell us about some of the reflections from your side and the World Bank and the challenges and of course the actions that we need to take. Over to you.
Thank you, and thank you to the organizers for inviting the World Bank. And here, on behalf of the World Bank, I want to say that we are very honored to be part of this conversation. And I agree, it's very hard to say something interesting after the statement that Fosia said and the video and all the previous panelists who have been sharing with you very wise words. So in a very humble way, just to say that overall we know that the justice, if it's not implemented, is not enough, right? But in addition, justice could be a powerful tool if when FGM is not merely considered a harmful practice, but a criminal practice. So the first step is to ensure that the law is known, like the FGM is framed as a criminal practice. So first, a law does not have to be perfect or constantly reformed to be efficient. Rather, a law must first be known to be applied. Whether FGM is illegally through specific anti-FGM laws adopted over the last decades, or via general laws criminalizing serious bodily harm, these laws and their relation to FGM must be known by everyone, lawyers, judges, policy officers, medical professionals, community, etc. FGM is illegal everywhere in the world, independently of any special laws, and the focus on its criminal nature is not just equally adopted. For example, in Mali, like everywhere in the world, it is illegal to harm a fellow citizen and cut a healthy organ for no medical reason. If FGM had been framed by the term criminal rather or along the term traditional, we can imagine that a stronger focus would have been given to accelerating access to justice. So again, the first step is improving the knowledge of the law, and that's one of the key missions of the World Bank work on FGM, trying to support countries to develop professional community legal literacy trainings in partnership with the National Associations of Women Lawyers and National Committees Against Harmful Practices. I invite you to access some of the tools that we have developed, especially through our legal department. You can just Google FGM Legal Working Group World Bank, and you can find some of the tools that we have created to develop these trainings and for extend the knowledge of the legal aspects related to FGM. The second step is for the World Bank is to technically and financially support what we already know, that change comes from within, that governments and frontline grassroots organizations and activists are the ones who are most capable of ringing the alarm and soliciting the intervention of police officers and facilitating access to justice in general. FGM overall is a strong obstacle to the World Bank mission to end extreme poverty and increase shared prosperity on a lively planet. And that's established in our current World Bank Gender Strategy 2024-2030, where Pillar 1 is ending gender-based violence and particularly FGM. At present, the World Bank has 90 active projects in all different development sectors that include GBV activities that are accountable for the project, meaning that have indicators that make the project accountable for that. And several of FGM. I'm talking about all these different development sectors, health, education, transport, social protection, but especially in the case of FGM, there are several, and the sector that has been mainly including integrating FGM in the project is the health sector. And I want to just mention one main example, that is what we call it the SWEAT program, the Sahel Women's Empowerment and Demographics Project, actually implemented by our colleagues from UNFPA. And is one of the most, it's like a multi-regional program from the health sector that is being implemented in West Africa, and that looks to increase women and adolescent girls, especially empowerment, and their access to quality reproductive child and maternal health services. And this has been fundamental to combat FGM and to also work on the policies and law reforms around this. There are other examples. I know we are running out of time, but mainly working on West Africa, but in other parts, doing work in raising awareness through development and dissemination of media materials, workshops, campaigns, working with civil society, or authorities, etc. So looking forward, we must engage broader donor support and foster meaningful partnerships, like everybody said, while concentrating our efforts around survivor-led initiatives and organizations for the elimination of FGM within our generation. I would like once again to reaffirm the World Bank commitment to ending FGM. Thank you.
We talked about threats to bodily autonomy is essentially threats to social and economic rights. It's all connected. Thank you very much. And now we move quickly because we are at time, but I'm going to ask everybody if you could please stay with us, if you can, another 10 minutes and we will wrap up. I'm moving to Fatou Balde, who is the founder of Women in Liberation and Leadership from the Gambia. We're so pleased to have you, Fatou. Over to you.
Thank you, Excellencies, distinguished guests and colleagues. Thank you for the opportunity to speak at this important conversation. Like Fozia, I was also caught when I was 8 years old. So today I speak from the perspective of a Gambian woman, a survivor who works daily with communities where the practice of FGM remains deeply rooted. In the Gambia today, we continue to face a painful contradiction. Despite a legal ban, girls, including infants, are still being caught. And when the law is finally enforced, it is often after irreversible harm has already occurred. So the core question for us, how do we ensure justice for girls before the blade ever touches their skin? We know in the Gambia, for most communities, FGM cases are not reported. The fear of community backlash is profound. Responding or reporting an FGM case is often seen as a betrayal of communities and one's culture. And this can lead to consequences such as stigmatization, which communities and families fear. It can also lead in cases of violence. But secondly, when prosecutions do happen, women are the ones who are in the courtrooms. The reality in the Gambia is that mothers, aunties, and grandmothers, not the broader systems enforcing the practice, are prosecuted. In the last few months, 2 babies died after being caught. One was just 3 weeks old, the other a month old. In both of these cases, it was close female relatives who were taken into custody. This exposes deeper structural bias. Bearing this in mind, we have developed strategies. We do understand the need to have a law. The framework is important, but we also recognize the challenges that continues. So we have come up with initiatives that are supporting Gambians, communities themselves, to create community-led protective structures. These structures bring together former cutters, women who once promoted and participated in FGM, alongside male allies, including religious leaders, community leaders, and youth leaders. These networks operate as early warning and early intervention mechanisms. Members are trained to identify girls at risk, and they mediate directly with families, particularly women who've just had daughters. They also intervene before cutting takes place, and they link cases with health or social welfare, and in some cases, CSOs, to provide support and interventions to these families. This model recognizes a critical truth. By the time the law is applied, it is already too late. The girl has already been caught and the harm has already occurred. So prevention must therefore be the front line for justice. However, these efforts, as I said earlier, we continue to face challenges, but they are definitely complementing the work that we are doing. And I am very encouraged to hear Her Excellency share some of the lessons from Eritrea, and this is a model that we are strongly following. So just to conclude, justice is really addressing the inequalities that allow a harmful practice to be valued more highly than a girl's bodily autonomy, her dignity, or her life. If families will still choose to cut their daughters, despite knowing the risk and the law, then our work must focus on transforming the ecosystem around the girl, her family, her community, and the power structures that shapes her destiny. Real justice is when a girl is protected long before the law is needed. Thank you.
Prevention needs to be at the front line of justice, really. Thank you. And thank you for sharing your story with us. We're grateful for your voice in this movement. I move to Divya Srinivasan, human rights lawyer, global lead on ending harmful practices at Equality Now. Welcome, Divya.
Thank you so much. I think this conversation is really timely for us at Equality Now because we just launched a report last month, which looks at global opportunities and challenges in litigating cases of FGM, in which we looked at 7 really landmark cases across the world, from the Gambia, Liberia, India, the US, which were both constitutional cases as well as civil cases where there was a push for conservation, as well as criminal cases to look at what's been the impact that this litigation has had on the movement to end FGM. And I think one of the critical areas of impact which really came out from the stakeholders we interviewed for the report was that sometimes cases before the justice system can play a big role in breaking the silence around FGM. Especially in places where it's not well known or it's still very taboo. And it's helped bring the issue to public limelight and raising the awareness on FGM. We also analyzed the barriers to accessing justice for survivors through research on 10 focus countries. And I think Fatu's already really set me up well here because I want to highlight 2 of the major barriers that came out among the many that we before. The first is that we really don't have enough data or evidence which shows us how these laws are being implemented, who they're being used against, and we really need that to before we can even attempt to analyze the effectiveness of the laws. Just as an example, there was a study in Kenya in 2024 conducted by the Clooney Foundation for Justice, which looked at 68 cases, and they found in the cases studied, 55% of the people prosecuted under anti-FGM laws were survivors themselves. And in 11 of those cases, they were minor survivors. And in only 6% of the cases, the cutter or the person who actually performed the FGM was the one who was being prosecuted. So it really begs the question of, are these laws doing what we were expecting them to do, or what the original objective was? While it's not a national study, it demonstrates why we need more information and analysis in all countries where we have such laws to look at how they're being implemented. And it also really highlights the importance of obviously survivor-centered approaches towards access to justice, and not re-victimizing survivors through the justice system after they've already undergone the violation of FGM. Second, in many of the cases we studied for the report, survivors and witnesses reported facing harassment, threats to their safety, physical violence, like Fatu has mentioned. And here, I think laws relating to victim and witness protection are really important. There are gaps in these laws in many countries which do not adequately protect FGM survivors or witnesses in these cases, or even when such laws are in place, the lack of implementation and the lack of resources means that survivors are not able to effectively access these witness protection programs. They're not able to, kind of leave the village for the duration of the case in some cases when they need to kind of avoid this backlash. And this really inhibits survivors' abilities to take forward cases while ensuring their own safety. And some of the other challenges highlighted include low reporting of cases, protection gaps in the law, just limited definitions mentioned before, lack of provisions to address cross-border FGM, poor investigation and evidence gathering by the police, difficulty in really bringing evidence to prove FGM, and many other cases. And I think also finally, maybe the last point I would say is really that cases can take a really, really long time to go through court, which makes it difficult for survivors to move on to their lives. And even with respect to public interest litigation cases, like in India, there was a case filed in 2017, and it's finally coming up for hearing again next month after being in abeyance for over 5 years. So the long wait into its access.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you for pointing out the complexity of these issues. We now go to our final speaker in this panel, Oluwasian Osowabi. She's the Executive Director of Stand to End Rape Initiative in Nigeria. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Excellencies, guests. Thank you for having me. I'm speaking from the Nigerian perspective, and UNICEF reported in 2022. It is an outdated data, but it's important to give context. We had about 19.9 million survivors in Nigeria who are experiencing genital mutilation and cuffing, which accounts for the third highest number of women and girls who have undergone FGM worldwide. That's a huge number. But in terms of the prevalence, we cannot underestimate the impact of FGM on the lives of girls in the community. But I want to focus more around interventions that have worked and are scalable. The first is regarding prevention. It's engaging community leaders or leaders of culture and faith, improving their understanding of the harms that FGM causes young girls in the community, but also ensuring that we are building the capacities of community members themselves to identify, like one of the panelists mentioned, identify girls who are at risk and try to remove them from situations that make them vulnerable to FGM. We also need those leaders as well to challenge the belief that FGM is required by faith or culture, because I was engaged by UNFP a few years ago on a project in a state, and when I was engaging parents in the communities, one of the things that I heard for them practicing FGM was to protect their daughters. They had the notion that a girl who is not caught when she's given birth, the babies tend to die, which is a myth. So we had to work with them to change the norms and the understanding around FGM and help them see differently. And the leaders of culture and faith in those communities then publicly challenged that belief and made declarations to abandon FGM. So it's important that community leaders, even women groups and girls themselves are part of those conversations. Secondly, I want to talk about strengthening legal frameworks and enforcement. We've heard about policies, but I realized that the existence of policies does not necessarily mitigate the abuse from happening. It only responds to it when it has happened. Of course, the Nigerian law provides provisions to prevent FGM from happening, but when you look at the punishment for those who practice it, it is inconsequential compared to the harms and the damage that FGM already has caused. So it's important that we have specialized prosecution and enforcement units. I believe that Kenya has an anti-female genital mutilation board that works with law enforcement and civil societies to monitor cases and strengthen implementation of a prohibition of FGM, of the FGM Act in the country. I believe this is a strategy that can be employed across different countries. We also need to have judicial training on harmful practices for judges, prosecutors, and the police. They need to understand the legal and cultural dynamics of FGM to properly prosecute cases. For some of the legal enforcement agencies, they don't even know the provisions of the law or how to interpret it. So one of the things that we do at STAIR is working with law enforcement agencies to build their capacity to implement the laws. We also need community-based reporting mechanisms where safe and confidential channels are created to help girls, teachers, and community members report cases early because they are able to identify it, particularly during school holiday periods when cutting often occurs. I also wanted to share about, sorry, give me a second. I also want to share about survivor-centered justice and protection systems. There is a need to have integrated support services combining healthcare, psychosocial support, and legal assistance. One of the things that we observed in our country was survivors have to navigate different systems, and these most times prevent them from actually reporting cases or following through to access justice. So it's important to strengthen pathways for referrals so girls can easily get justice, but hopefully we can prevent it. But for those who have experienced it, they can get justice. We also need safe houses and emergency protection for girls who are escaping imminent cutting and also for their families. Because one of the things we heard from community members, if they don't cut their girls, they are ostracized and nobody wants to be without community. So we need to create safety nets for these families who are speaking publicly against cutting. Finally, I wanted to share that one of the things we've seen is immigration in the past couple of years, whether parents from the global north going to global south to do FGM, or for those who are leaving the global south to migrate to the global north. There is a need to strengthen cross-border protection agreements between countries where FGM prevalence is high. We also need digital early warning systems where institutions and individuals like teachers, health workers, and local leaders can easily flag risks. And we also need data-driven advocacy using research and evidence-based data to show the prevalence of the issue and target high-risk areas that would influence policy reforms. But most importantly, I believe it's important to put money in the hands of activists who are leading this work in their communities, helping them reach the communities that they need to reach, and scaling survivor-centered interventions as well. We also need to engage men and boys in the conversation, in seeing them as partners in shifting harmful social norms as well. So ending FGM requires more than legislation. It requires justice systems that protect survivors, create opportunities for FGM not to be practiced, and also reject harmful practices. Government needs to be willing to invest in prevention and accountability. And when these elements come together, access to justice becomes not only possible, but transformative for millions of girls. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Importance of investment, and that will really move things. So thank you for ending with that. Please join me in a round of applause for thanking our return to their seats. And to conclude our session, it is my pleasure to invite Jacinta Matishi, team lead from the Girl Generation Africa-led movement, to share closing remarks for us. Thank you so much. And
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues, survivors, allies, and friends. As we come to the close of this important discussion, I would like to begin by thanking the governments of Burkina Faso and Italy, alongside the government of the Gambia, Nigeria, Canada, Eritrea, Indonesia, Sweden, the UNFPA UNICEF Joint Program on the Elimination of Female Genital Mutilation, and civil society partners, including the Girl Generation, for convening this timely and important dialogue here at the 70th session of the Commission on the Status of Women. Today's conversation has reaffirmed something that many of us working in this space have long understood. Ending FGM is not only about changing harmful social norms, it is fundamentally about justice, rights, accountability, and the protection for women and girls. FGM is a violation of human rights. It denies women and girls their rights to bodily integrity, health, dignity, and equality. It violates the rights of the child and undermines the promise of gender equality that the global community has committed to uphold. And when justice systems fail to respond effectively, the violation does not end with the act itself. It is compounded by silence, impunity, and the absence of accountability. This is why conversations like the one we have had today is so critical. We have heard encouraging examples of progress. Many countries have taken important steps to criminalize FGM, strengthen policy frameworks, and develop mechanisms to protect girls and support survivors. The existence of legal frameworks in many countries signals growing global recognition that FGM must end. Governments, regional bodies, and international institutions have increasingly aligned their commitments with global human rights instruments and development goals. But we must also be honest about the challenges that remain. Laws alone do not end such violence. Justice must be accessible, trusted, and meaningful for the girls and women it is meant to protect. Too often, survivors face barriers when seeking justice. These may include fear of retaliation, stigma within communities, lack of awareness about legal protections, or justice systems that are distant from the realities of rural or marginalized communities. In many places, survivors are still navigating systems that were not designed with their needs in mind. We also heard about emerging risks that require urgent attention. Clandestine practices continue to evolve. Cross-border cutting exploits gaps between legal systems. The lowering age of girls subjected to FGM further complicates protection and access to justice. And the growing medicalization of FGM, often framed as a safer alternative, undermines both ethics and the law while masking the continued violation of girls' rights. These developments remind us that justice systems must remain dynamic, responsive, and rooted in human rights principles. At the same time, we've heard powerful examples of innovation and progress. Countries are exploring new ways to bring justice closer to communities, from mobile courts that reach rural populations to legal aid funds that support survivors in navigating justice systems, or digital platforms that connect girls at risk and survivors with services and protection mechanisms. These innovations demonstrate that solutions exist. But perhaps the most powerful lesson from today's conversation is that justice cannot succeed without communities themselves. Across Africa and beyond, civil society organizations, grassroots movements, youth activists, and survivor networks are playing a critical role in bridging the gap between communities and justice systems. Over the past decade, initiatives such as the Girl Generation have helped support an Africa-led movement to end FGM, strengthening partnerships across civil society, governments, and international actors while amplifying the voices of survivors and frontline activists. These collective efforts remind us that ending FGM is not the work of one institution or one government. It is the work of a global movement. And at the heart of that movement must be survivors' leadership. Survivors bring knowledge that institutions alone cannot provide. Their lived experiences challenge systems to do better and help shape justice response that are compassionate, effective, and grounded in dignity. When survivors speak, they do more than share stories. They reshape policy conversations, challenge assumptions, and bring urgency for our collective efforts. Ensuring that survivors are not only heard, but meaningfully engaged in shaping solutions is essential if justice systems are to truly serve those most affected. Equally important is the role of grassroots organizations working directly with communities. These organizations are often the first point of support for girls at risk and survivors seeking assistance. They are building trust within communities, facilitating dialogue, supporting prevention efforts, and advocating for stronger legal protections. Yet, despite the critical role they play, these organizations often operate with limited resources. If we are serious about accelerating progress, we must ensure that civil society and community-based organizations are supported and resourced. So first, we must strengthen and enforce legal frameworks. Laws must be accompanied by effective enforcement mechanisms, trained judicial actors, coordinated responses that ensure perpetrators are held accountable while survivors are protected. Number two, we must ensure that justice pathways are survivor-centered. This means providing access to legal aid, psychosocial services, and protection mechanisms that prioritize the safety, dignity, and well-being of women. Third, we must invest in prevention and community engagement. Legal frameworks alone cannot succeed without community ownership, education, and social norm change efforts that empower families and communities to protect girls. And fourth, we must strengthen regional and international cooperation. Cross-border collaboration, knowledge sharing, and accountability mechanisms are all going to be essential in addressing emerging risks and ensuring that no girls fall through the gaps between systems. Excellencies and colleagues, ending FGM is achievable within our lifetime, but achieving this goal requires more than communities. It requires sustained political will, strategic investment, and accountability at every level. Justice must not remain a promise written into policy documents. It must be a lived reality for every girl and every survivor. The global movement to end FGM has made remarkable progress, and initiatives such as the Girl Generation demonstrate the power of Africa-led, survivor-informed collaboration to drive meaningful change. So as we leave the room today, let us carry forward the urgency of this conversation. Let us strengthen partnerships, invest in justice systems that truly serve women and girls, and ensure that our commitments translate into real protection for those at risk. Because ultimately, justice for women and girls means ensuring that no girl anywhere in the world ever faces the risk of FGM again. Thank you very much.
So much, Jacinta, for closing us off. And Thank you to all of you for joining us again, and feel free to stay in the room for a few more minutes. We have the room for about 20 more minutes if you'd like to meet any of the panelists or, mingle and network. I just want to thank all of our speakers, experts, member states, civil society. Thank you for joining us. We only have 4 years left till the end of the SDGs. Let's work together and have some collective action on justice and all aspects of ending FGM. Thank you so much.
It's okay. I know. I know, I was also like to control, so. Yeah.